Hello, back for part three of the examination of what the hell is Flickr Street. Flickr Street is a project I've been working on for about 30 years, so the majority of my lifespan on planet Earth. Um, and basically, it's comics, it's prose, it's metafiction, it's multimedia, it's got some music thrown in, it's kind of a world building scenario. It is a world. It's kind of like an alternate reality, um, which diverges at various points from ours significantly in the 20th, mid to late 20th century, and especially in the 21st century, which of course we're in now. Um, though there are parallels, it's kind of the world seen through this analogical mirror, as I like to put it. The way I see the world, kind of a distorted, I don't mean in a bad way, but maybe um, refracted. The light is refracted, it's prismatic, different colors come through to flog that metaphor. And well, Philip was a farmer, my favorite fiction writer, mentioned the analog mirror, and it was a method in which he did genealogies linking various fictional characters together by different writers into one world or one universe, which ultimately became known via Win Scott Eckert, a friend of mine, as the Newton universe. Um, I discussed some of that in the last couple of episodes. My work with those guys and the big influence it had on me. But Farmer talked about the analogical mirror, so I kind of refer to it as Farmer's analogical mirror, all caps, FAM, I guess, FAM. Hey, and but he also said things like, albeit possibly a cracked or funhouse mirror. So he said it, the master himself, and actually he was a grandmaster of science fiction. So that's kind of what I'm doing with Flickr Street, creating this world that is reflecting my views on our world subtextually and maybe urtextually through fiction and through a lot of interrelated characters and their kind of sagas and travails. So this kind of it definitely has that soap opera like uh, layout to it, at least the way soap operas used to be paced. They're really not so much that way anymore. I mean, there are still arcs, but it's not as tight. It's not as elaborate. It's not as there's not as much momentum building. There's too much emphasis on short-term payoffs and short-term characters and little quirks for the audience and the youth, to try to get them in there in the summertime and watch this stuff. And consequently, there's only four soap operas left on American television that are still fairly prosperous. Spread across three networks, so that's really not very much. The ones on CBS are real successful. The one Days of Our Lives on NBC is fairly successful, but it wouldn't surprise me if they phase it out too. But cancel most of the other ones. But General Hospital is the lone ABC one, and it's still very strong. It has the advantage of having a amazing mythology behind it and continuity, which the writers have been able to tap into in recent years, and a lot of acting talent. It's a great pool of talent there. People they can bring back that can kind of weave in and out of the canvas, so to speak. And that kind of stuff's a big influence on Flickr Street. Um, but I covered a lot of that in the first part of this. Um, in the last part, I went into much more detail regarding um, my time with the Comic Book Artists Guild and how I pitched some ideas that were set in the Flickr Street universe, which was the first material like that I had written in about 4 years at that time. At all, I kind of put the story aside in late 2001. I was at a kind of a stopping point, and the story had been playing out, taking place a few years ahead of the future of when I was writing it, but I'd finally kind of caught up. So when I got to the 2002 2003 era of the story, I was in like late 2000 in our reality, and then I kind of pushed it aside. Not deliberately. I guess I lost the connection with those characters, and I went through a lot of personal turmoil and came up with something called Desolation Falls, which was brief and short-lived, but that material eventually got, as almost everything has now, been integrated into the larger Flickr Street continuity. And that's kind of what I'm driving at with the comic book artist guild material is that the two stories that I pitched, one of which I did a complete script treatment of, called Counterfeit Messiah. They were set in that reality, but they had new characters at the forefront and they could stand alone. You didn't have to know all the references. You kind of got the idea you were in kind of an alternate world or whatever, but it wasn't full scale. You know, it could conceivably be set in our world, which a lot of the material in Counterfeit Messiah I was privy to in real life and is pretty close parallels in the story. And maybe for legal reasons, that's about all I should say. Though the main antagonist of that story, his real life basis, you know, served a time in prison for uh, his actions that are depicted in the story, his fictional analog. Um, so he's really not in a position to criticize me. But anyway, enough said about that. That did not turn into a full comic book story. Instead, Mark Maz, the one of the ranking editors there, was submitting my ideas, was submitting ideas from various of us to Keith, the publisher of a comic book artist guild anthology that was going to be American manga styled, so to speak, and that was called With Honor, and it was named and edited and compiled by Shanti Therian. So basically, Shanti would, you know, screen the material, pass it over to Mark, and Mark and her would kind of sign off on it and then give the last little tally to Keith, and he'd be like, "That's cool." He didn't really do anything hands-on much at that stage, which is good, because when he did it, you know, it got lost. The whole project's now kind of forgotten by humanity. It's only been retconned away or something. But there were only a few hundred copies published, printed, I think, which was not the impression we got at first. But you know, everyone runs out of money, and this was, you know, during the amazing Bush years, so you know anything could have happened. I don't personally fault Keith, but some errors were made with my story, but they weren't made with malice. They were just made with work stress, workload. Because in fact, I was working very closely with Shanti on my material, and she even included my story Snow Leopard in a lot of the promotional material and ads that they took out in print and online for the book. At some point, I'll drag out my copy and show it to you guys. I do have the complete story Snow Leopard on both my Facebook page, among my albums, and I have it on my DeviantArt page. That's probably the best place to find it. You can read all 16 pages and also see the color cover, so to speak, that I did with Shanti, and that I penciled very roughly, and she inked and painted and colored. It's a really beautiful work. I really was proud and flattered, and I thought we made a great team. But she's kind of zeroed in on her own material and is doing something kind of similar to what I'm doing. She's doing kind of and it was actually an influence on me. She was actually an influence on me. She's doing kind of a multi-tiered, multimedia kind of thing in the sense that she's done these comics, she's published on her own, she writes, she draws, she paints, she does all this fantastic stuff in the computer, but she also is a sculptress and has forged these dolls, built them and shaped them with her own hands of her own characters. So she kind of has her own action figures for her own line of heroes and villains. But they're really not a superhero story, but it is a fantasy erotic slash, you know, vampire slash, you know, immortality. A lot of archetypes and mythology and angst-ridden kind of characters, but you know, it's way better, infinitely better than the kind of glut of, you know, Anne Rice kind of knockoffs that we've been, you know, bombarded with for the last 30 years. So, in any case, Snow Leopard got published, and not many people saw it, and it wasn't supposed to be part of Flickr Street in any way whatsoever. And for many years, well, not many, but in several years, I did not. I saw it that way, as one day maybe I'll pick it up and do it. So I covered all this before in the prior videos, so I know I'm repeating myself quite a bit. This could be the first video for some of you guys, so you'll have just a little bit background or understanding of where I'm coming from, if not total context. But at least you'll kind of get what Flickr Street is, you know, what it was and what it is and what hopefully it will become, because that's something I'll be reiterating in each video, because that is the purpose of the videos and answering the question of the title, what the hell is Flickr Street? So I've pretty much covered that. So after the Comic Book Artists Guild, I worked on my ex-wife's then wife's, website. She never slept, and I did a lot of material for that. Created content, mostly reviews and a few videos, which you can watch right on this channel, and they're embarrassingly poorly made. But and I was very nervous doing them, but the material's sound, solid, information's accurate at the very least. They were all, movie reviews. A couple of them were book reviews also, comic book reviews, I believe, might be one in there. But we did all that for the website. And my friend Sean Lee Levin, he was uh, through our association, um, through through my association with him, and obviously my being married to the publisher of the website, uh, they hooked up, and Sean was writing for it, and then he got promoted to being the associate editor. And really, toward the end of it being a group project, a group effort rather than a one woman thing, which is what it began as anyway. Um, Prior to that, the last year or so, Sean was doing the vast majority of the work on the website, either editing or writing or collecting and compiling the writings of himself and me and a young lady named Heather Royston. We were kind of the core writers, reviewers, and then occasionally my ex-wife would pop something out and with something. After a time, I feel like there was a tension there, a tension, not a tension, between us on this project, and I realized, that's her baby. So I think that was another subconscious a reason that I was pushed back to Flicker Street, because in working with Wynn and the Wald Newton gang and Shanti and the Comic Book Arts Guild and my ex-wife, and she never slept. There were still other people's projects, other people's characters generally, or at least very least, I was at the whim of other people to get them out there, as in the case of Snow Leopard. Um, so I'd already had Flicker Street. I had years of material. I had boxes full of notebooks, handwritten, and a bunch of documents in my computer, and a lot of illustrations and character designs. And I was like, well, something made me think, this is where I need to go. Just prior to that, Sarah was planning on publishing an adjunct website for me called Purple Serpent, which was going to contain webcomics that I did with Sean's editorial assistance and several artists. And the first one was going to be a continuation of Snow Leopard, but that got thrown out pretty fast when the artist who had been selected was moving on to other projects. C. Lou Disharoon, he's really a comic book authority, kind of academic guy and a musician and a great friend. So I started developing other ones, and a lot of them were based on my Wald Newton material. So there was public domain characters and then disguised fictional characters, etc. And so it was a lot very closely along the lines of the material that Wynn is doing now, and has started writing for major publishers like Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated and others, Moonstone, Dynamite Entertainment. Was he for Dynamite Entertainment? Some of those characters were. Um, but yeah, and of course they have their own publishing company, Meteor House, which has done some great work publishing their work and also republishing uh, lost or out of print Philip was a farmer material, and that has been a major boon to humanity. So for that alone, Wynn and his crew should probably have some kind of lofty award, like a Locus Award or a Grandmaster Hugo Nebula Award for caretaker of the farmer legacy. It can be shared with Wynn and Michael Croteau and Paul Spiteri and Christopher Paul Carey, all of whom are brilliant and have changed my life by knowing them. I'm not so much in their circle anymore. My immediate life is kind of all consuming, and my creative life is pretty much consumed by Flicker Street. So, but that's how I met Sean and became friends with him, was through that scene. And so that developed, and we were going to do these web comics, and we had some really talented artists, Matt Mundorf, Adriana Palka, who really believed in the project. But again, they got a little overwhelmed with their personal lives. Matt had a family, and it was just a lot of work material to take on. So I decided to reroute, and I had a couple of other webcomic ideas, and one was called Austerity. And Austerity was kind of, there wasn't a lot to it beyond like the premise. So it kind of had an open, ended thing, which could be developed or just told in one or two installments. And again, was not set in the Flicker Street continuity at all, nor in any of the webcomic continuities, which a lot of them shared that kind of Walden Newton universe uh, vibe. So essentially, Austerity was kind of a female science fiction, fantasy, uh, kind of angel of death slash vigilante slash angel of vengeance kind of character. I love those characters in films, and so I've never had too many of them in Flicker Street. I mean, I do now, but um, that was one of the first. Snow Leopard was really the first fully realized character of that nature that I came up with, and the subtitle of Snow Leopard on the promo material was a cry for vengeance. You know, hardly an original line on my part, but that's what it was. You know, she was crying for vengeance. And you know, since there's only one story, she didn't get it, and since it had to be a self-contained story, it was, but it really was the origin of Snow Leopard, so we could jump off further. Like I said, that got scuttled. So back to Austerity. So around 2012, 2013, this idea occurred to me, and I drew a couple of pictures, and she was kind of a genetically modified, genetically engineered character. I guess you could compare to archetypal characters like Barbarella or Octobriana. I was heavily into that kind of European material at that time, and Mobius and Inky Bilal and those artists were on heavy metal and Metal Hurlant, and so that kind of influenced this organic kind of weird, way of drawing that world around her, which of course, obviously, many years ago also influenced Frank Miller on Ronin heavily, and he did a fantastic job on that book. No matter what you think of him, like or dislike him or his material, Ronin is an absolute fucking masterpiece in my opinion. It stands up. It's visionary. He took a lot of influences that are now very mainstream thanks to the internet and thanks to people like him, but that were very obscure and underground at the time, like Mobius and Kazuo Koike, Lone Wolf and Cub, and that kind of stuff. And he fused them together into this thing that was part samurai action fantasy and part dark science fiction, kind of cyberpunk almost, in the Mobius vein. So all these things fed into Austerity, but I didn't really have much story material per se. I had kind of an origin, I had a design, and I had several characters. So essentially, Austerity was a young woman who, in the original story, she was the lover of a kind of a rock star, metal star named Diablos, and they got in a car accident, and he was killed, and she was like, her body was almost completely destroyed. But due to a set of circumstances that I had not worked out at that time, they were going to remain mysterious, and I didn't really know what they were. They chose her head, her brain, and part of her spinal column, what was left of her. It's kind of Battle Angel, Alita ish, which I also was a fan of that during that period. Still am. The comic, I mean. But so they rebuilt her with a different body and but she was more or less genetically human, albeit synthetic, kind of like the Vision is a synthezoid. He has soft tissue. He's not, a robot or whatever. Kind of like the characters in the Westworld TV series. They are robots at base. They're metallic and silicon base, but they do have synthetic flesh and nerves and muscles covering them. So they're on the way to being a synthetic human. They are a humanoid, and they're all are anatomically correct, like the Vision was. And at this point, Austerity had that kind of body made for her, but she really was an engine for revenge on the people that, when she learned her origin and how she'd been kind of manipulated, and her lover was dead, and there was no chance of bringing him back, and yet she had been brought back from the dead in her mind. She waged a war on this scientific oligarchy that had made this happen. And she had a giant cyber sword, long, and it was kind of linked with her neurologically. And she also had a gun, a little kind of Buck Rogers looking ray gun, very retro looking, but it was incredibly powerful. And I forgot what kind of energy it dispensed in the original story, but it was something kind of exotic or with a real world parallel even. So that was it. That was austerity, and I was just going to build from there and just hope the story told itself the way Flicker Street always had for me. I was tired of struggling to construct things, even though I loved the challenge. I needed the challenge of working for other people and working on properties that weren't all out of my head, working on other people's characters, learning their voices, making them compatible. So all that experience I'm talking about now, which roughly spans the years 2005 to 2015, or 2013. Those 8 years, that's invaluable for me. It was a long siesta from working on my story, which the siesta, I guess, lasted, if you don't count the material I submitted to Mark Maz, um, 2002, 2001, late 2001 until about mid to late 2013, 2013. So, almost 12 years between, that was the longest gap in my life since I've been working on this, which is most of my life. And I felt like I was coming home in 2013. So the web comics and my own website weren't taking off. We were doing okay money wise, but there wasn't much forward momentum in the lives of myself and my ex-wife. And so, we were doing her website, like I said, but I really wanted to do a story, and ultimately the only thing I could really, arrive at that came whole cloth from me and that I had complete control over was Flicker Street. But I knew that my ex-wife was not going to do a web comic of Flicker Street, that it was impossibly complex, and it would be too much to take on, and I would need other artists once again, and the best artists that I'd found are already going to work with me, but they were all busy with the other projects or just, real life. Um, but essentially, um, sorry, I just got a notification from a friend. Um, but yeah, so I decided I'm just going to do it the way I always did it. Just kind of write it almost like a little diary or journal, just as it comes to me. But I did have a specific goal. I decided rather than pick up where I left off chronologically in the story, I was going to write a definitive backstory for the entire Flicker Street universe from 20,000 years ago to roughly the year 1980. And then everything was going to spin out of that because the first key events in the modern story, which is the main story, began taking place in 1986, 1987. The second important arc of the story chronologically that will hopefully become reality is called 1987 and spans 1986 to 1988. But it's that time frame, and I wrote a lot of that in 1986, 1987, and 1988. And, some of it was curated by the aforementioned JJ. Um, but when he withdrew from working with me, uh, I just reworked all the material. And by 1989, I was completely on my own and have been ever since with Flicker Street. So, like I said, 30 years. So, um, yeah, so I think I'm going to get lost here. My train of thought may be derailed or detoured. All right, I'll attempt to regain some composure here. Um, Basically, I decided to begin from the beginning. So it was like the saga, but it was a backstory. I didn't intend on telling the story that way. I was going to tell the story the way most really good stories are told, which is starting right in the middle, right, in the action. And that's something that I didn't do when I was young, and I had to kind of learn to do things that way. I thought that in itself was a formula, and I resisted it. But in a way, it is. But actually, it's a creative shortcut, boon, whatever to you to jump in and go from there, and then work out the rest. Backward engineering it. Um, so but I still had a lot of the material that was like a saga. Like, how did this all start? How did it come to this? So that's kind of what I wrote it as. And I wrote 17 treatments, varying in length from 3,000 to 10,000 words apiece. And uh, I wrote them between mid 2014 and the beginning of 2016. So over a year and a half, I wrote the 17. Though the 17th was just sketched out; it wasn't actually written. Now it's been written, and I've been re-editing it. Um, but in any case, none of these were going to be published anywhere. They were just going to be for my use, so that I would have a definitive sequence of events and dates, times, blah blah blah, ages of characters. so that I would not contradict myself. Because and it's fortunate when it's just you can do this. Um, this is the problem that's plagued, say, Marvel Comics, is that there's too many chefs in the kitchen, and a lot of them aren't even chefs. They're kind of more like short order cooks, and it's destroyed that cohesive reality. Um, and when the ironic thing is, the only times their material has really resonated with me in the last, say, 25 years was a brief period when they were kind of letting each book have its own tone and own theme and own genre during the Bill Jemas years. And many people hate him and have criticized him. I have had some friends who are in the industry who despise the man, but I respect him tremendously. I think what he did with Marvel, not only did they finally catch up with DC creatively because they kind of gone septic in the 90s, but they really surpassed them. The quality of their books was unbelievable for a mainstream publisher that primarily did superheroes. But of course, they were ignored by the critical press. Like Comics Journal, you thought they would finally wake up and give Marvel a break because this time they deserved one, but they didn't. It was totally like it never happened. It's kind of like the media shut out Bernie Sanders. It's like the Comics Journal was like, Marvel isn't doing this. We're not seeing this. It's not happening. And, therefore it wasn't discussed until the very end of that era when Brian Michael Bendis broke through. And since he had started Indies and he was unquestionably popular on a huge scale all of a sudden, to most people, suddenly, um, Comics Journal did some interviews and pieces on him. But that's kind of a commercial decision on their part, and it's almost hypocritical. But they did the same thing with Todd McFarlane when he broke, and Neil Gaiman, etc., Alan Moore, all the way back. In McFarlane's case, it was obviously he was doing mainstream material that the editor of the Comics Journal despised aesthetically, and so his interview was more combative. It was like an attack, like, why are you doing this trash? And he, had made Todd defend himself, and Todd, I didn't like the material myself either. I liked a lot of the ideas. I did not like the art or the execution of them, but I also respect the fact that he published them himself and he got rich himself on his own characters. So in that sense, then he made incredible action figures. So I'm fine with McFarlane, but I know he's a contentious figure in the comic book reality arena. But anyway, so getting back to what I was going to say is that Marvel was hidebound by having so many different people and editors and whatever and corporate hands and directing their overarching continuity that the writers didn't really have any freedom creatively to do anything. And of course, no one could die, no one could age, no one could, a baby could be born, but it's going to stay a baby. It was all ridiculous and contrived. And it's been that way gradually more and more since the early 80s, since Jim Shooter took over. It wasn't like that in the 60s and 70s. It more or less occurred in real time, and there was development of storylines and true changes. And then that altered. And there's a lot of people who like that. There's a very famous writer that I met through the Walt Newton Circle who says that Stan Lee told him himself that the illusion of change is what it's about. But, this guy is not, he's done some great work, but more in literature than comics. He's done some good work in comics. But neither him nor Stan Lee were doing hands-on work in Marvel in the 80s, 90s, or beyond. So, I have to say, well, that may be their preference is just to keep that illusion, so to speak, going in that endless adventure of no change. But that's not my idea of telling a story. Me personally, a lot of the writers in the new pulp scene that I know also adhere to that ethos, though they do tend to actually set the stories chronologically, during certain times, so that not so much the characters age, but when they happened, and you don't see them age on camera. You just kind of go through a series of adventures when they're at their peak, so to speak, like Doc Savage in the 30s and 40s, Tarzan in the 1910s to the 1940s, the Silver Age superheroes in the 50s and 60s, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of how that, even Batman started in the 1930s, the first real, quote unquote, real Batman, rather than retcon much later. There's no sliding time scale, which I've always just despised. Time can go backward. You can tell stories that have already happened. But this whole, I'm a clairvoyant, I'm going to tell the stories that are happening in the future and then set them in the future. it violates the Walt Newton concept and principle of how that material has worked, uh, and it really violates my own personal sense of storytelling. So I just ignore it. It's no big deal, and I don't even pay attention to what Marvel's doing unless it's a movie based on characters that I like that I grew up with, or if it's a something controversial and annoying that they do that is unavoidable, like turning Captain America into a Hydra agent or something, and making a giant media hoax out of it. And they're good at that kind of thing, but I don't care. That doesn't matter to me. So consequently, I know many people in the comics industry, various avenues, and the majority of them I still have connections with on social media, but they're not the ones who are supporting Flickr Street. They're not the ones who are interested in my art style or this kind of storytelling. Um, the people that are kind of artists from around the world, incredibly talented artists, all kind of with distinctive voices. Many of them are dark art in the dark art, so to speak, and surrealism and fantasy and horror. And the majority of them are from other countries than America, and the vast majority of them are female, which is mind-boggling. I would have never thought this kind of thing existed when I was younger. The internet has validated my beliefs that I'm not alone in this world among weirdos, that there are many others, and that makes me feel great. That's that sense of community. But those people have embraced my art and have supported my pages as much as they can, because there's only so much they can do, because I only have so much content and material up. When I put more output out there that is visible to everyone, then they'll have more to help me with and promote on my behalf. But until then, the onus is mainly on me. Like I said the last time, I have the Flickr Street studio, and this is kind of where I'm at right now. Right now, it's a makeshift eBay store, but it is the studio that Kelly and I set up, and then it became Flickr Street Studio. And my curator for the studio is Sean Lee Levin, and he's an all-purpose assistant. And like I said on one of my other videos, a Man Friday of Flickr Street. Um, so, yeah, 2013 to 2016, I worked out these backstory treatments. And I'm going to use this as a way to wrap up this video, because this is becoming overlong like the others. I wrote them in my old house during the last year and a half of my marriage. Well, before we were separated. We were legally married a lot longer. And it was a weird time. It was a dark time. I mean, there were times that I had a lot of financial success, but made mistakes that squandered a lot of it. And then I also um, was very happy being married and happy having all this free time because of having more money. But the job I did have, I despised, and they despised me. So it was a mutual, despicable kind of situation, mutually despicable. And um, my wife was not happy with me, and I had no clue of that until much later. I knew she wasn't happy in general, but I thought we were kind of allies. And I realized that all too late. And I kind of heard the joke long after the punchline had been revealed to the rest of the world, and the joke was on me. I was very foolish, but I came out on top of the situation due to generosity of my late father, which is how I inherited some money to begin with. Um, so now I sold the house we inherited. Sorry, I say we because I was married at the time, but she has no legal hold on any of that. It was inheritance. The house that I inherited, um, I sold in 2015, and I moved into here. This house is paid for, and it's a nice townhouse, and it's big for one person, but that's okay. I'm hard to deal with, apparently, based on the few people that have lived here with me since I've been here. So I think my cat can tolerate me, because he himself can be extremely vexing, even today. But you can see him back in the background. He's finally sleeping. So now he's like really sweet and cute and cuddly. But um, so I pretty much did these in private. I was having some major health issues during this time too, some mental health issues and some physical health issues. I had Achilles tendonitis, so I was in agonizing pain in my foot and my heel all the time, and naturally I had trouble perambulating. So I I had a Cam Walker boot on for a couple of months, and I walked with a cane for about a year and a half. Um, so I would just sequester myself in my bedroom, our bedroom. That was our bedroom. But she would be off doing whatever, and I would sequester myself in there when I wasn't working my part-time day job, and I would curl up with my other cat, Selena, who's now deceased, unfortunately. And she and I would watch videos. We watched a lot of movies that I'd bought used at Manifest where I worked. We had explored every episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, and consulted with and corresponded with Sean over them because he's a huge fan. And but amongst all that, I wrote those treatments, and I began 20,000 years ago with Earth and what happened that no one really knew about until into the 20th century. And so it's like a secret hidden history. And it's not, it became plausible in my mind because I finally assimilated all my influences in fiction and also my own life experiences. So there are, like I said several times, analogical. There are parallels with reality and with other fictional realities, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's a reality I've constructed and I'm very proud of. So by the time I got to the 16th treatment of the projected 20, um, I had just gotten out of the hospital. My foot was a lot better. I stopped using the cane. I was having some severe depression. I was living here. I was separated from my ex-wife, and I basically spent a year getting my head together, and my physical and mental health, and it became better than it had been in my entire life. So I almost felt I was aging backward because I'd felt this giant burden, on me mentally and physically for several years, and it was gone. I was free. I wasn't beholden to any human on earth for the first time ever. And few people that I have known have been in that position. And I'm not in that position now, but I was for a couple of years. And it will, if you are mindful and explore yourself and what your true purposes are and needs and wants in life, you can seriously evolve during that period to another level of thinking about the world because you're kind of withdrawing from the world to an extent as an outsider. You're watching it, but you're not forced to constantly transact with it or make compromises, even whether they're good, healthy compromises or ridiculous sellout compromises. You don't have to make any concessions. You have to concede to your own needs, and that becomes your primary motivating force. So that got me to a place that was valuable. It got me to a place in my personal life. It got me to a place in the way I lived my life, physically lived my life, my health, and my environment. And it got me to a philosophical area where I was able to connect with a different kind of lover than I had with my ex-wife and prior. And the two that I've been involved with since then, it's a different level of transaction. It's a different kind of um, wow, yeah, it's the next level stuff, as they say. Um, I evolved politically and I evolved radically on all kinds of different levels. So when I came back into having a corporate job like I have now, a day job, um, which technically is part time, but I often work full time hours. Um, I'm okay with it because I can make the compromises I need to make because the freedom is up here. It doesn't have to do with this ultimately. I mean, this can bear down on you and make you lose that, but yeah, and that's a big part of my current story arc in Flicker Street, which I'll be going into in depth in a couple of the installments called Ellinger. And Ellinger is a character who, at this point in my life, he's very different than me in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I identify so much with his philosophy and what he's trying to do to better the world and himself and his people. And yeah, it's very resonant with me, and this has all been a journey towards that. Um, so anyway, I was in bad shape though, and starting to recover, and I got to treatment number 17. I had it sketched out. I wrote a couple of really bad paragraphs. My writing was suffering, the quality of the actual treatments, and I was becoming aware of it. It was becoming forced. I wasn't as spontaneous because the fact that I had to follow a timeline for myself because that was the whole purpose of it. Um, so I got around to the year 1978, 1979 in the story, and I decided 20, I would not finish 20. So I decided to do 18, and my first draft of 17 I wasn't happy with, and then I just kind of lost interest in it. I did sketch out an 18 over a period of months. Whether it'll ever be done or finished is who knows. Um, the installments I did finish have been radically re-edited starting in 2017, and are almost all available on the my page called Henry Covert's Flickr Street, and there may be some links to them also on my page called Flickr Street Studio, and you can read them in order. There's 16 posted, and each one has several parts. Like I said, they're like 3,000 to 10,000 words a piece. So all told, it's like a little short novel, synopsis, whatever, of the history of this universe. And I tried to make it as user friendly and new reader friendly as possible. But a lot of this stuff works contextually, and not just contextually within itself, but within the connections the reader or the audience is making in their own mind. Like a lot of great art does, like say Twin Peaks. A lot of that is the power of that is what the person who partakes of the art is drawing from it as much as what the creator of the art is putting forth into the world. So, all right. So I'm wrapping this up. So next time I'll pick up with the how the treatments ended up and how I ended up doing those 2 pages on social media that I've just mentioned. And that'll probably be as far as I get in the next installment. So thank you for watching and take care. I will talk to you soon.